Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to AA Laws NG webinar today. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're so sorry that we're starting a few minutes later than scheduled. We apologize for the inconvenience. I'm sure that we've all been waiting, especially since today's topic is something that is very relevant to the Nigerian society today. So, today on the webinar, we're going to be looking at tenancy, rights and duties, the economic strain. That's what we're going to be talking on today. Something very relevant to us. I know that we have tenants here, we have landlords here, and we can't wait to learn from this series. And speaking to us today from the Avail team, we have Miss A.E. Adegoke Esquire. She has a wealth of knowledge to download to us today, and we're going to have her come up right away. Please just give us a few seconds. Thank you. Welcome, Miss Adegoke. I believe you can hear me, please.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
Can you
thank you
hear
very
me?
much. Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you as well. Thank you very much, Miss Adegoke. You're welcome. Thank you for joining us on the webinar today. So, to everyone listening, as I said earlier, today we're looking at tenancy rights and duties, the economic strain, something very relevant, something that we all need to learn concerning. And I'm just going to be
Please, can
kickstarting this.
you? I can't hear you very well. Can you increase the volume of the voice? Nice. I've
Okay,
actually
okay, no
increased it.
problem. Okay, please just give me a second. Okay, yes, please, can you hear me clearly now?
Okay, it's better now.
Okay, thank you very much. So I was saying that to kickstart this conversation, I'm just going to paint a scenario that I want you to, give your legal perspective on. So I recall that about
Oh,
there was it not when I was a bit younger? Yes, my parents and I we lived somewhere as tenants. And then one morning, the landlord came knocking. I think earlier I had communicated to my parents, not by any official notice or anything, just by word of mouth, that he needed them to leave the apartment because he wanted to use the space for his auntie or something like that. And then my father was like, "Oh, we can't leave yet. We're not ready. It's too soon. It's sudden, blah blah blah." And next thing we knew, like about a month later, landlord came, removed the roof. He said that that was stage one. That if we don't leave by the end of that month, they're going to come and disconnect all the pipes, connect the water that is in his house, so he can do whatever he pleases with it. And so we should get out of his house because he wants to use it. And it was just a very messy situation. So, that was like the first scenario that came to my mind when I saw this topic, the whole tenancy rights and duties, the economic share. Because things I wanted now, then I was still a bit younger, things were economically tough already. And a landlord expected us to leave his house in that other 1 month and came to remove the roof and do all sorts of things. So, yes, with that, can you please open the floor on this conversation for us, Mr. Adegoke? Thank you.
I could not get. I can't hear.
Okay, you're welcome back, Miss Okay, just sorry for the
Thank you, ma'am.
break in transmission, everyone. All right, you're welcome back. So, before
Thank you, ma'am.
you had to leave the call, I was trying to paint a scenario because I wanted you to speak on that. So I'll just summarize it again. I was
Okay, ma'am.
explaining like how to I wanted to know the legal opinion, or should I say legal perspective on this situation. I was saying that while I was younger, I recall that we had a landlord who, by word of mouth, told my father that he needed us to leave the house within 1 month because he needed his aunt to use the house. And then when we didn't leave within a month, because obviously it was so impracticable, like we didn't even think it was serious. He came, and then first thing he did was to remove the roof, and he just did all sorts. The first thing that next thing he was going to do was to disconnect the pipes, disconnect the water. I remember my father took pictures of like him breaking some parts of the house over our head because as far as he was concerned, it was the house and we needed to leave. So yes, I wanted to hear your opinion on this for us to like start this conversation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Miss Adiola. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here, and I want to thank everybody listening to me. Thank you very much for joining us. So now back to your scenario. You said you have a landlord, you had a landlord, and the landlord by word of mouth gave you notice to quit for within 1 month that you should leave the property, and after the month expire e came remove your roof and all other things just to throw you out of the house. So let me start by addressing the issue of notice to quit. Firstly, for every landlord that wants a ten ant to leave his or her house, you cannot by word of mouth give notice to quit. What you need to do is a written notice to quit. A notice by mouth is not valid. A notice by mouth is not valid. So the first notice, no, first of all, that notice that by the end of 1 month you have to move out of the um premises is invalid. You cannot give notice by word of mouth. Now let's move to the issue of coming with some people to remove the roof of the house. That is also illegal in law. In fact, the ten ant has the right to go to court and demand for damages by removing the roof. What of if rain fell and then all the load of the ten ant in the house got spoilt? Who is going to be responsible for that? So as a landlord, if you know you want your ten ant out of the house, what you need to do is to give proper notice to quit, and then after notice to quit, then you are going to give 7 days owner's intention to recover premises. If after the 7 days owner's intention to recover premises, the ten ant is still in the premises, has not left, then you can go to court, and the court will help you to effect to send the ten ant out of the premises. So you should not resort to self-help like said in the scenario whereby the ten ant is coming with some people to remove the roof of the house just to force you out of the premises. That is totally not acceptable. That is wrong. And if the ten ant is somebody like me and that like court, I will go to court, and you're going to pay heavily for taking such action. What you're going to pay for is going to be for my emotions, for my properties, and for so many other things. And the fact that even the notice that you gave is invalid. So I think that addresses the question.
Yes, it
Miss
completely does. Thank you very much, Okay. Yes, I'm here with you. Thank you very much. Yes, that completely answered my question. So now I know that what we should have done in that situation was to have gone to court and ensure that we sued the entire,
yeah,
we sued the landlord, sued him for every form of
yeah.
damage. Yes, that's beautiful.
Court does
Okay, so now,
court does not support self-help at all. So if you know that you've given a notice and your ten ant is still within the premises, you should go to court. not taking action by yourself. That is self-help, and court frown at it heavily.
Okay, thank you very much. So, basically, I've been able to gather from everything you said that, first of all, a 6 months notice period is required whenever you want a tenant to quit. And it's not supposed to be given by word of mouth. You have to give a proper written notice, right? After which, when the notice
Yes,
expires, if the tenant does not leave, then you can now give 7 days notice of owner's intention to recover possession of the premises. And it is after that you
yes,
can go to court to recover your property. Beautiful. So now, my
exactly.
next from what you said is this 6 months period of notice, is it always the period required? Like, does it apply to every form of tenant, or is like, so is it to yearly tenants, fixed tenants, monthly tenants? Is the 6 month notice, does it apply to every form of tenancy? Yeah, that's my next question, please.
All right, thank you very much. 6 months notice to quit does not apply to every tenant. In Nigeria, we all have this mentality that we are all entitled to 6 months notice to quit, whereas it is not always the position. Now, let me start like this. When you get an apartment and you want to move in, then you have an agreement. In your agreement, if it is there that the period of your notice is going to be 1 month, that 1 month will form the period of notice to quit that you're going to get, not 6 months as popularly known. So if you sign an agreement, a tenancy agreement, which inside the agreement it has said that, oh, the amount of your notice period is going to be 1 month, then 1 month is what your notice to quit is going to be. So that is for yearly ten ants that have agreements, that has tenancy agreement. In a situation whereby you did not have tenancy agreement, the law presume the provision of the law applies, and that is 6 months. So where you have an agreement, you have 6 months notice to quit. When you do not have an agreement, rather, you have 6 months notice to quit. But where you have an agreement and your agreement specifically give you period of notice, it might be a month, it might be 2 months, it might be 3 months, that agreement will take preeminent over the law, because you and it's assume that you and the landlord agree to that notice period. So that notice period will form your notice to quit period. Now, in a situation whereby you are a weekly ten ant, maybe you pay your rent in a weekly, you are entitled to just 7 days, a week notice to quit. And if you are a monthly ten ant, you are entitled to just that 1 month notice to quit. So if you are a quarterly ten ant, you are entitled to 1 month notice to quit. So it is not every ten ant that has the right to 6 months notice to quit. You have to check your agreement. Okay, how many months is inside my agreement? Okay, if it is there that it is 2 3 months, then that will form your notice to quit period. Notice to quit period. But if there is no anything regarding your notice, the period, then the provision of the law that 6 months period with them, that one will not apply. So, but let me say this: in a situation whereby you've default in paying your rent, there is nothing like ìgbà tí mi ò wá sanwó, sorry, we might have non-Yorubas here. So there is nothing like after all you're supposed to give me 6 months or you're supposed to give me 3 months notice. No. Once you fail to pay your rent, what is next is 7 days owner's intention to recover premises. That is the law. That is the current position of the law. In a situation whereby you are not paying your rent, then the landlord do not have to give you 6 months notice. What he has to give you is just 7 days owner's detention to recover premises. But in all other circumstances, according to your agreement, or where there is no agreement, the provision of the law, which is 6 months notice, will apply. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Miss Adegoke. This was very, very. I like how you deeply answered the question, and I really like the fact that you even covered for situations where there is no written tenancy agreement. Because I was going to ask that next. That okay, so we understand for those that have tenancy agreement, but what of those that don't have? So I really like the fact that you covered all that ground, and then the fact that you went extensively to speak of those who feel like they don't have to um pay extra rent, because I've seen the situation with some tenants where um their rent has expired or their tenancy agreement has expired, and then they just feel like they can use free 6 months in the landlord's home without paying any form of money.
No, that is
So
totally wrong. And that's even remind me. A client called me like 2 months ago and he was like, I want to sue my landlord, blah blah blah. I was like, okay, calm down. What happened? So he narrated his experience. He said his rent expired last year, December, and he met with the landlord and they agreed graciously. The landlord graciously agreed to give him 1 month extra just for him to get an apartment. You know, there are some landlord that just don't like going to court and all other stuff. So the landlord graciously agreed to give him 1 month extra, which is January. So at the end of January, he is still inside the house. And now the landlord now serve him with notice to, 7 days owner suspension to recover premises. Then he called me and he was like, I want to sue my landlord. I was like, okay, what happened? He said, the landlord did not give him notice. I was like, which notice? He said he gave him only just 7 days. So I asked him, okay, have you been given notice to quit before? He said, no, that he has not been given any notice to quit. So I said, okay, calm down. Okay, when last did you pay your rent? Then that's when he started saying, actually, the man came to the house. He explained to the tenants that he needed the premises and he wants all the tenants to be out, and that's why he did not pay the rent, the subsequent year rent. And now they've served him with 7 days. So I have to explain to him that, see, it doesn't work that way. And many Nigerians, as we all have that mentality that we have 6 months notice. I told him that within that 7 days he has to find a new property to move into. And if he knows that he will not be able to find a new property to move to, he should allow the landlord to go to court to recover his premises, then plead to the court that, oh, I've not been able to get a premises. I've not been able to get another apartment to move to. So crave the indulgence of the court that, oh, what I need is just time for me to maybe probably 2 months, 1 month. If the court is okay with whatever you present to the court will give you time. But that does not mean you will stay free of charge. You still have to pay. So don't let me deviate too much. So that's just an experience, by the way.
okay, thank you very much for sharing the experience, Ma. That was very enlightening. So I was wondering, you explained that tenants cannot just stay free of charge, they have to pay. So my question is, what can the landlord legally do where a tenant just, you already said that you can't resort to self-help, right? So I want you to answer this question in 2 ways. First of all, I want you to like tell us some other things. For instance, I mentioned landlord removing the roof over my parents' house, and you mentioned that that was self-help. So like, can you help us with other forms of self-help? And then to prevent the landlord from resorting to self-help, what are the legal things that he can do where the tenant refuses to pay? So like where the tenant has overstayed, or maybe some they will just intentionally overstay and then decide that, oh, I'm going to leave after 2 months, but they don't want to pay for those extra months that they've stayed. How can the landlord legally recover his money? Does the law like have any form of coverage for that?
Yes, yes. The law actually supports. The law is at the back of me, at the back of the landlord. The law back the landlord. However, like I said earlier, in a situation whereby a tenant refuses to move out of an apartment, and you've served your notices, then the next thing is to go to court for eviction. So in one of the reliefs you're going to be asking for from the court is that rent that the tenant refuses to pay, maybe the rent itself or electricity bill or other bill that the ten ant refuse to pay. So in that kind of situation you can easily put it, maybe your first relief might be you want the possession of that apartment the ten ant is staying, and then your second relief might be the rent. That's main profit, we call it main profit, that the ten ant has refused to pay over the month or over the year, and then the electricity bills and other bills that Anyway, there are some ten ants that are so funny that when they see immediately they see that the landlord is already taking steps to go to court, or the landlord is even already in court, they will quickly move out of the apartment. In that kind of situation, the landlord should still not fear, e should still go ahead with that eviction process. So during the court proceeding, then they are going to explain to the court, oh, this person, when we brought this matter to the court, the man has left the apartment, where however the other the reliefs, the rent and other expenses incurred by the landlord has not been paid. So you can easily tell the court that, and the court will grant all your reliefs. So if that answer the question, I don't know.
Yes, thank you. That answered the question. So please, I want you to answer the other arm of the question. That's like, what are some other things that landlords do that will amount to self-help, so that tenants that are listening can like be able to
Okay.
tell that, oh, when your landlord does this, it's self-help and it is illegal and you can go to court for it.
Okay, some other circumstances that I can actually say result that you can term as self-help based on recent what will I call it, recent activities of the landlord. I don't know how to frame that. Is that one of it is that locking the door of your tenant with another padlock. I mean, when your tenant refuses to pay and then you went get a new padlock and then you lock the apartment, that's self-help too. That's number one. Another situation is whereby you ask another tenant, you collect rent from another tenant and ask that tenant to move inside the property that the former tenant, or your bad, let me use bad tenant, your bad tenant is currently in. In that kind of situation, it is also self-help. I don't know how you want them to live together, bring in another person, saying because this one has not paid his rent, so another person should join him. Tó bá yá, ó máa kó jáde. No, that's also self-help. So another situation is where you force the door of your tenants open, and this one is very rampant. So you don't do that. When you force the door of your premise of the premises that your tenant is occupying, if you force the door open, even if you did not do anything, maybe after forcing it open, you now remember, I should not have done that. It is still self-help, and the tenants can still bring an action against you. So, and then another self-help is bringing police. When you've not even obtained the order of the court, bringing police to come and open it. Some people believe that once they have police with them, they can do and undo. So bringing police to your tenant's premises or property is occupying is also another self-help, and an action can be brought against you. So those are the situation I can highlight at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much, Ma. Tenants on the call, I hope you're listening and you're learning from this. So if you're, especially that part of coming to just first open your door, a lot of people would not think that that's part of self-help. They just think that just a mistake on the part of the landlord or something you have to
No,
overlook.
the fact that the law knows that you own the property, but the moment that another person move into that apartment, you are no longer you did not have the possessory rights, let me put it that way. And for that moment, the person that is occupying the property has a superior right more than you. Until that person leave, that's when the rights will now come back to the landlord. But until the ten ant move out, the ten ant is the alpha and omega of the property he or she is occupying. So the landlord do not have any rights at that moment to enter, to force the door open, to use another lock. No, the landlord cannot do that at that moment.
Okay, thank you very much. So actually, you have sort of pointed me in the direction to my next question, because the next thing I was going to ask you about actually was concerning the rights of tenants. So from our conversation so far, I've been able to gather that tenants have a right to quit notice, because you mentioned it that if you're a yearly tenant, you are entitled to 6 months quit notice, except if your agreement says otherwise, right? And you also just mentioned that the tenant has a possessory rights, it's the alpha and the omega of his apartment until he's legally evicted. So, what are some other rights that tenants have? over the landlord. This is the things that the law provides tenants with.
Okay, like I've said earlier, that you have a processory right to that apartment that you have. As a tenant, you also have right to notices. If your landlord wants to move you out of the premises, then he has to go through the proper procedure. And you also have right, how will I say this now? I'm not here with my slide, but okay. Can we pen this question for a while? I'm trying to get my slide so I won't be talking offhand.
Okay, man, no problem. Thank you very much. So while you're trying to access your slides, let me just move on to my next question for you. So the thing is now we're about to okay, well, so we spoke about the rights of tenants just now, which you're about to elucidate more on. But I also want you to tell us the duties of tenants. I mean, they have rights, they must also have obligations that they are supposed to legally perform. So yeah, that must also point us. I want you to also point us in that direction, please.
Okay, one of the duty of a tenant is to pay your rent. I mean, that's the foremost duty of a tenant. You must pay your rent. If you did not pay your rent, you can't complain if your landlord then bring an action to throw you out. I mean, give you notice and all other things. Another duties of a tenant is to keep the premises he is occupying in a good tenant how will I put it, in a good state, save for reasonable wear and tears. Like, you cannot be occupying a property and you will be the first person to complain that your toilet seat got broken. Another time you are complaining that, oh, your paint, I mean your wall paint is fading up, that the landlord should come and repair it. So as a ten ant, you are expected to keep the property you are occupying in a good tenable state. Another duty of a ten ant is that you have a duty to ensure that you live in harmony with other ten ants by not constituting nuisance. Nuisance in the way that you should consider other ten ants. You cannot say because I'm occupying a property I can do anything I like. What? Okay. When your right starts affecting other ten ants, then you know that something is wrong. So you must not constitute nuisance. Let me put it that way. You must not constitute nuisance. So those are the duties of a ten ant.
All right. Thank you very much, ma'am, for that. So I think that actually is very important, especially the part where you were talking about tenants not constituting nuisance. Because I don't think tenants know that they can legally be sued for that. Because we have tenants that just put themselves as trouble. They just really enjoy being troublesome and they disturb the peace of other tenants in the compound. So it's very
Yeah,
interesting to know that landlords can actually take their tenants to court for disturbing the peace of their premises.
exactly. Exactly. The landlord can take the ten ant to court if you're disturbing the rest of the community or the rest of the ten ants in the property.
Okay, thank you very much. That's beautiful. Okay, so now let's address the elephants in the room. The issue that
Okay.
probably a lot of people here, the issue that is disturbing everybody in society now, rent increase. The issue of rent increase, landlords have been like I've heard so many ridiculous hike in prices, like people landlords doubling the rent prices arbitrarily. So now the question is this: can a landlord unilaterally just increase the price of rents? Can the landlord increase his rent at any point in time? And what really are the conditions for a rent increase. I wanted to just shed light basically on that matter. Thank you.
Okay, on rent increase, that has been one of the major thing affecting everybody now, because you just wake up, you see a letter from your landlord telling you that he has increased your rent. So on rent increase, first of all, rent increase should not be unilateral. The landlord should not be the only person that will decide that, oh, I want to increase this rent. There should be proper processes. When you want to pay the first your first rent, it was you were told the rent and you agreed to it and then you paid. So it should not be like then the landlord will then wake up one morning then tell you that, so I'm increasing the rent, and that is final. I don't think that is proper. The proper thing for a rent increase is, first of all, let me tell you this: for every agreement as a ten ant, if you want to sign an agreement, ensure you go through the agreement and look for a clause that is called rent review clause. Rent review clause, that clause is going to be what is going to be protecting you, or what will protect you if the landlord increase the rent. In a situation whereby you do not have that agreement, well, you still have some rights, but just that it will now it's now streamlined. It's not as someone that has an agreement that have rent review clause. So your rent review clause will tell you, well, I mean, in your rent review clause, it will be stated there that the landlord has to give you notice that he wants to increase the rent. Both of you have to sit down and decide on the rent that will be acceptable. And upon the agreement, then that rent that you both have agreed upon will now form the new rent. So rent should be based on agreement. It should be contractual, not something that is based on emotion and all those stuff. So your rent review course will tell you method of initiating review. It will tell you the time frame. Maybe within 6 months, you and your landlord have to come together and discuss the new rent that you want to bring, and then method of calculating the new rent. And that is very important, because you can decide to say, my rent was 700K, and then suddenly you are increasing it to 1.2 million naira. You have to tell us, you have to decide. No, the tenant and the landlord has to decide, how do we want to calculate? Is it based on the current value of the property? It is based on inflation and all other things. So they have to also look at that. And then procedure for resolving disputes. In case that you the tenant and the landlord are not able to reach an agreement on the new rent, then you should have a procedure for disputes. Maybe you will refer it to a negotiation and mediation and all other non-litigation procedures. So as a landlord, before you will increase rent, one, and then as a ten ant, when a landlord serve you a notice to increase rent, what you should look out for is that, do you have an agreement? Is there a clause that is titled rent review clause, and was notice given? Is the notice reasonable? So those are the things that you have to look at when you are trying to increase your rent. And you cannot enforce rent. I mean, if there is a rent review clause and your landlord did not follow that procedure, what you simply have to do is just to ignore him. Whether he serve you letter of rent increase or anything, when you ignore him, I do not mean that you should not pay rent. Still pay rent, but the former rent you are paying, that's what you are going to pay. So let him go to court. Let him go and tell the court that he unilaterally increase the rent and now you are not paying. Let him go there. There has been cases that support a situation whereby landlord has to agree with ten ant, especially where there is a clause before they can increase the rent. In Lagos, for instance, a landlord cannot increase rent on his own without informing the ten ants. I think it's in their recovering of premises law, if I'm not mistaken. So I think
All
that.
right. Thank you very much, ma. So, um, now I understand that you should ensure that there should be a rent review clause in your agreement so that your landlord cannot just unilaterally increase rent. What happens where there is no agreement, where there is no, like, the tenancy is just um basically, you know how most tenancy situations happen. Oh, I'm looking for house, you go to an agent, I pay for the house, I'm living there yearly, I renew my rent yearly, I renew my rent yearly. In such situation where there is no written agreement, what happens? Or if there is an agreement and there is no rent review clause in the agreement, what happens?
Okay, if there is no agreement, or if there is an agreement and there is no rent review clause, and the money that your landlord is asking for is unreasonable, you can approach courts and place your case before the courts. Mostly it's usually magistrates or customary courts that attend to tenancy matter. So you can present your case. The court will help you to look at the, okay, where is this property located, what is the current value of property in that area. But the situation we find ourselves in the country is that we kind of accept things the way they come. We know how to adapt and adjust ourselves to so many situations. So that's why most of the time, when that's why landlord can even increase the rent without the tenants agreement, without involving the ten ant in the agreement and everything, because they know that we will accept, we will not take any action, we will not go to court, what they've said will be the final. So so in that situation, I will advise, if anybody find you or yourself in that situation, you can approach the court and let the court decide what is reasonable and what is the current value of property in the area where you are staying. So that's it. But in all other cases, rent increase should be based on agreement, should based on your agreement and notice. Agreement first, you and your ten ant and landlord agree first, then the landlord will bring a notice informing you of the increase based on your agreement, and then you can then pay the rent. But if all those things were not followed, you can decide not to pay the new rent and continue paying the former rent. Please don't stop paying rent, because when you get to court and if anything happen, you can easily tell the court that, oh, I've been paying rent, just not the new rent. So don't stop paying rent, continue paying rent, but ensure that you go to court if your landlord is acting funny. Let me put it that way.
Okay, thank you very much, Ma. That was pretty explanatory. Thank you so much. All right, so now that we've dealt with all these issues, right, like how to handle them and everything, so I think you've mentioned them in passing, but I just want you to highlight them again. Other than going to court, which is one major conflict resolution medium that we have emphasized a lot on this webinar, I want you to please point us to some other conflict resolution mechanisms that tenants or landlords can explore when issues arise.
Okay, if you don't want to go to court, you can decide to go to multi-door courtroom. That's one of non-litigation something. So you can go to multi-door courtroom, and I believe that every state now have multi-door courtroom, whereby you can come with your with your landlord, and then they will look at the issue and they will try to resolve it between you amicably. You can also go through the way of negotiation, like I said earlier, and we have arbitration. I will actually not suggest arbitration, because arbitration is more or less like a courtroom, just that it is less formal. You will still go through some processes and it will still take some time. But negotiation, what is this other one? Multi-door courtroom and conciliation. I think you can go through those processes to ensure that all issues are trashed out.
Okay, thank you very much, Ma. We are gradually coming to the end of this webinar live session. So, Ma, I want you to tell us, what would you say is the biggest mistake tenants make, and what would you say is the biggest mistake landlords make as regarding this whole tenancy issue?
Please, can you rephrase your question? I can't hear you properly.
Okay, so I said that. What would you say is the biggest mistake that tenants make? And what would you say is the biggest mistake that landlords make regarding managing this whole tenancy situation, given the economic rise in prices and all?
Well, I would say the biggest mistake ten ants make is not having proper ten ancy agreement, not putting everything in writing, not documenting every agreement you have with your landlord. Just like we said, that rent refill clause, assuming it's in your agreement, then it will protect you so much that you, in fact, you yourself, you will feel it, pé okay, this is actually very very okay. So ensure, as a ten ant, ensure that you have everything documented. Your even if it is just a simple thing that you utter out of your mouth, that is just mo ti gbọ́, just ensure that you put it in writing. Let the landlord sign that, oh, indeed I said this thing and I agree to this thing. So that's one of the biggest mistake a ten ant can make, is not putting everything down in writing. Even in a situation whereby you make renovation into, to a landlord's property, if you did not, if the landlord allow you to make that renovation and it is not in writing, the landlord can come back any day and say that he did not give you the authority to renovate the apartment and that you should move out. So as a ten ant, ensure that everything, every conclusion you reach with your landlord is put down in writing and it is signed. So that is the biggest mistake. Not having everything documented is one of the biggest mistake a ten ant can make. Now coming to the landlord, one of the biggest mistake a landlord can make is not following the due process, not following law. You are supposed to serve notice, you are not serving notice. You are supposed to go through court to evict a ten ant, you are not going through court, you are using another person, you are using locks, you are using police, hooligans and all those stuff. So that's another. And you want to increase rent, you did not follow the proper process, you did not call your ten ant, you did not agree on the new rent. So as a ten ant, the biggest mistake you can make is not having your everything, you every conclusion you reach with your landlord documented. And as a landlord, the biggest mistake you can make is not following the due process, not following the law.
Okay, thank you very much, Ma, for how you answered that question. And one thing I would really like to highlight, or should I say reiterate, from what you just said is that, because I could pick out from what you said that even employing the help of policemen to come and evict the tenant is part of self-help, because it's not part of the should I say legislated process for evicting a tenant, because some people feel like, oh, police officers are legal officers, so you can just bring them. So, but from what you just said, I could gather that bringing police officers to intimidate a tenant is also part of representing to self-help, and it is illegal eviction. Thank you very
Yeah.
much, Ma, for
Yeah.
the knowledge that you have fed us with today. Please, do you have any final words for the tenants and landlords in the house just to round up this session?
Well, I will just let me just say this. Ignorance of tenancy law is very, very expensive. As you've been saying online, there was a lady that was crying out that she spent a lot renovating an apartment and the landlord
Okay, to all our listeners, we apologize. Please just give us like a minute or two for Miss Abigoke to join us back on the live session. Thank you. All right, we apologize once again for the delay. We have come to the end of this session. I'm sure we've learned a lot. I'm sure we've learned a lot. Please let's ensure that we follow the law in all situations, whether we are tenants or whether we are landlords. Okay, so if you have further questions, you can still send us your questions either here. You can drop your questions in the live chat, or if you come back to watch this, you can drop your questions in the chat section, or you can send us your message on any of our social media platform. Just follow us on Instagram. You can send us a message, ALOS Engine, or if you are on any of our communities on the legal desk, you can send us a message. Also, we have something very important that we'd like to announce to you. We're bringing something very beautiful to your table. It's called the Avail L and C live session. Yes, the Avail L and C live session. And what this is basically going to be about is that to you get real-time answers from us answering your real-time questions. So instead of us just maybe picking webinar topics and coming to you like this, we will answer your questions live through the Avail channels, right? So we're ready for you. We hope you're getting ready for us as well. Come with all your legal questions. I know that with every scenario we have like legal questions. We have legal matters that come up with every area of life that we interface with. Basically, either at your workplace, at your home, either on the road. Basically, things happen that just wonder that is there something that we can legally do concerning this matter. So come with all your questions and we'll address them on the Avail L and C live. Thank you very much for joining us again today. We'll see you next week on the we'll see you next week, or basically you can watch out for further information for when we meet again with the Avail L and C live. Bye.